The central nervous system consists of brain and spinal cord. So we studied about the brain and its parts before. This brain consists of 60% of essential fatty acids, and these essential fatty acids will determine the ability of our brain. And these essential fatty acids are not synthesized naturally in our brain. For that we have to consume food which are rich source of essential fatty acids. The foods are like fish, green leafy vegetables, almond, walnut, etc. And the instrument called electroencephalogram, that is EEG, which records the electrical impulses of our brain, and it can detect the abnormalities in human brain waves, and also it will help in diagnosis of seizures, epilepsy, brain tumors, head injuries, etc. So when seeing the spinal cord is cylindrical in structure. It was covered by meninges. So this meninges will cover this brain also. The brain and the spinal cord was covered by meninges. This meninges is connective tissue layers. Three layers will be there. That is the dura mater, pia mater and arachnoid mater. These three layers are together known as the meninges. And the spinal cord was protected by the vertebral column. And the spinal cord will starts from the medulla oblongata and it will ends at the first lumbar vertebrae. Then the posterior most part of the spinal cord tapers into a thin fibrous thread-like structure. This fibrous thread-like structure was called as the phylum terminale. So this is the spinal cord. So if we cut the spinal cord like this, that is the cross section, and this is the cross section of the spinal cord. At the center we can see the grey matter, and outside the grey matter white matter will be present. So in the center of this grey matter there will be a cavity, and that cavity is called the central canal, and that central canal, that cavity was filled by the cerebrospinal fluid. And this grey matter, it will be in H shape, and it contains four horns. Two horns at the top and two horns at the bottom. The top two horns are called the posterior horn, and the bottom two horns are called the anterior horns. And the nerve fibers will travel from the posterior horn. The nerve fibers which are traveling from the posterior horns are called the dorsal or afferent root, and the nerve fibers which are passing through this anterior horn are called the ventral or efferent root. And these two roots are joined together to form the spinal nerve. So this is the grey matter, and outside this grey matter white matter will be present, and this white matter have bundle of nerve tracts. And then this spinal cord contains the sensory neurons and the motor neurons. These sensory neurons will carry the information or impulses from the sense organs to the central nervous system. Central nervous system is brain and spinal cord. So here the sensory neuron will carry the impulses from sense organs to the central nervous system, and the motor neuron will carry the information or impulses from the central nervous system to the other organs like muscles or glands. And the important function is the spinal cord will controls the reflex action of our body. Here we can see about CSF, that is cerebrospinal fluid. It is lymph-like watery fluid. It was present in both the brain and the spinal cord, hence it is known as cerebrospinal fluid. In brain, the brain was protected by the skull, and in between the brain and the skull, the cerebrospinal fluid will be present. And in spinal cord, the central canal of the spinal cord was filled by the cerebrospinal fluid. And the functions of the cerebrospinal fluid was it acts as shock absorbing fluid. So it will act as the shock absorbing fluid and protects the brain from damage, protects the brain from the shock. And this fluid will supply nutrients to the brain, and it will collect and remove the wastes from the brain, and also it will maintain constant pressure inside the cranium. Cranium is the part of the skull. Now we can see reflex action. Reflex action means the response or reaction which will occur automatically without consciousness. So the reaction which occur without consciousness, without our conscious, is the reflex action. And this reflex action, most of this reflex action was regulated or controlled by the spinal cord. Hence it is also known as spinal reflexes. This reflex action is of two types. They are simple or basic reflexes and acquired or conditioned reflexes. The simple or basic reflexes, it was inbuilt and unlearned reflexes. So no need to learn, automatically it will come. So the actions which happen without thinking, that is the simple or basic reflexes, and the examples are coughing, sneezing, yawning, and we will use to wink our eyes when the dust particle enter inside. That is simple or basic reflexes. And the next is the acquired or conditioned reflexes. Here, these reflexes will happen because of the result of continuous practice and learning. So example we can see, so the keyboard or the harmonium we will use to strike the particular key by seeing the musical notes. So this is occurring because of the continuous training effort, that is acquired or conditioned reflexes. This is the types of reflex action. Now we can see about the pathways of the reflex action, how this reflex action is happening in our body. And here this is the arm. When we touch the hot object that was detected by the heat receptor or the thermoreceptor in our hand, and the neuron will convert the heat into the electrical impulse, and it will send it to the spinal cord. And this neuron is the sensory neuron. Then this neuron, from the sensory neuron, the signal was received by another neuron, which is called the relay neuron. This relay neuron will receive that signal and it will send the signal to the another neuron, that is the motor neuron. And this motor neuron will send the information to the bicep to pull the hand out. This is happening without thinking about it because they didn't transmit the signal to the brain. Directly the spinal cord is doing that action. And this entire pathway, that is the sensory neuron, the relay neuron and the motor neuron involved to complete the reflex action, is called the reflex arc. Here we can see the peripheral nervous system. This peripheral nervous system consists of cranial nerves and spinal nerves. So the nerves which arise from the brain are called the cranial nerves, and the nerves which arise from the spinal cord are called the spinal nerves. These cranial nerves consists of 12 pairs of nerves, and some of the nerves are sensory and some of the cranial nerves are motor. So example of sensory nerves are the optic nerves, which will stimulate the eye, and the motor nerves, which helps in the rotation of eyeball. And the spinal nerves. The spinal nerves consists of 31 pairs of nerves, and the spinal nerves have dorsal side and the ventral side. And the nerve which are arising from the dorsal side are the sensory root, and it will carry the impulses towards the spinal cord. And the nerves which are arising from the ventral side are the motor root, which will carry the impulses away from the spinal cord. So these are the two nerves, cranial and the spinal nerves, types of peripheral nervous system. Now we can see about the next type of nervous system, that is the autonomic nervous system. This autonomic nervous system is also known as visceral nervous system. Visceral means internal. It controls the involuntary function of the visceral organs, that is the function which are happening without our function in the visceral organ, internal organs like lungs, heart, kidney. These are all the internal organs. And this nervous system consists of two components. They are the sympathetic nervous system and parasympathetic nervous system. And this nervous system will work in opposite manner. Like if the parasympathetic stimulates the flow of saliva, means the sympathetic will inhibits the flow of saliva. And if the parasympathetic slows the heartbeat, means the sympathetic will increase the heartbeat. Like that, these two nervous system will work in opposite manner. to maintain the steady state, that is to maintain balance in the internal organs. For that, these two components are working in opposite manner. This is about the autonomic nervous system.